Okay, thanks for coming, everybody. I'm Linda DeMichiel. I'm one of the Java EE8 platform specification leads, and in this talk, I'll be trying to focus on the talk and ignore the beeping, which I guess is also being captured by the audio. And I'm going to give an overview of where we are currently with the Java EE8 platform. I'll probably talk faster than I should just to be sure that we're getting through the contents of this talk. So brief disclosure, what I'm going to talk about is still preliminary. Java EE8 isn't final, so don't make serious decisions on this basis. I'll start with some brief words of background as to how we got to Java EE8 and what our goals and plans for that technology have been. And then in the bulk of this talk, I'm going to focus on the main component JSRs of the Java EE8 platform. So the road to Java EE8, of course, started with Java EE7. Java EE7 for us was a great, oops, sorry. Thank you, Ed. I have two devices here. I'm looking at one that I control and one that I don't really control. So Java EE7, our themes were focused on support for HTML5, enhancing our web tier APIs, modernizing them, continued focus on ease of development, largely through leveraging CDI and injection, and then what we can think of as modernizing the Java EE infrastructure. So when we started planning Java EE8, we looked around at emerging industry trends and things that we wanted to be sure to incorporate in this release, such as support for the then emerging HTTP2 standard. It's now been validated as a standard. Support for reactive programming, better use of Java EE in the cloud. You could run your Java EE7 applications in the cloud, but that really wasn't the target of our work back then. Improvements for security, and so on. So we identified, oh, this is driving me nuts. We identified a number of themes that we wanted to focus on for Java EE8. Again, continuing our work for HTML5 and web tier enhancements, ease of development through CDI, and modernization of our infrastructure. When we announced Java EE8, these were the JSRs in our original plan for the platform. Of course, the platform and web profile, CDI, BEValidation, which cut across all of our JSRs, and then improvements to web tier APIs, such as incremental improvements to JSON processing, a new API for JSON binding, servlet, a 4.0 because of the HTTP2 work, improvements to REST for reactive programming, and enhancements to JMS, a new API, a modernized API for management, and then a new security API to simplify security in the platform. After we had gotten underway, we had a good kickoff for this release, and then a number of our spec leads got, unfortunately, diverted into other tasks. So we had a hiatus in the development of EE8. When we surfaced last year and looked at where we were and what had been going on in the industry, we realized that, one, we needed to get EE8 out. We needed to focus on getting it out more quickly than our current path would have led to. And we needed to focus more on what was critical in terms of support for the emerging trends in microservices and support for running our applications in the cloud. So the world had changed, and we needed to change Java EE8 to accommodate it. We announced some revisions to this plan at Java 1 last year, and we followed up with a large community survey that we hoped would validate the modifications that we thought we needed to make. This shows the results of that survey. The URL here is useful. I would encourage you to check through to that blog. So basically, the results here are to focus on technologies that were important for support for microservices like REST, JSON, servlet, to accelerate our delivery and to deprioritize areas that we didn't think were as relevant in this, for this purpose. So this reflects the updated plan. I've grayed out those technologies that we're not pursuing as part of EE8. JMS is a mature technology. Instead of enhancing it in a 2.1 release, we will require JMS 2.0 as part of Java EE8. Java EE management had barely gotten off the ground. We'll fall back to the existing management API as part of the platform. And MVC, the enhancements we had planned for an action-based MVC API, we're in the process of donating that JSR. Ivar Grimstad, who was one of the leading contributors in the expert group, has graciously agreed to take that one on. So it will continue, but it won't be part of Java EE8. So this slide graphically summarizes what's in this release. JSON, the highlighted technologies are those JSRs that we're focusing on that are undergoing major enhancements. The ones in blue are included. They are either unchanged from EE7 or in some cases there are relatively small scale maintenance releases that will be associated with these. JSONB is new to the platform. It was the #1 requested item when we had surveyed back in 2014, I think it was. And security has just released an early draft review. We expect that we'll be including that as part of EE8 as well. Okay, so now I want to focus on some of the new features in these JSRs. And since this is an overview talk, I'm going to need to be brief and just show brief code snippets. A number of our spec leads or expert group members are here at the conference, and they'll be giving talks on related topics, and I'll give you some pointers as we go. First up, JSONP. We had introduced the JSON Processing API as part of Java EE7. In this release, we're updating it to stay current with emerging IATF standards, in particular, JSON Pointer, JSON Patch, and JSON Merge Patch. And we're introducing some updates to integrate with features that have been added to Java SE8. So, what a JSON pointer is it's a string syntax for referencing into a JSON document. It's not yet attached to the document. You use the APIs associated with the JSON pointer interface to associate it with a document. And they're APIs for extracting values from the target document and then for transforming, for creating a new document from the target document. So if we look at an example here, we have a JSON array of contact information. We can create a pointer from the JSON factory class. Now, this pointer is not yet associated with this document. We associate it with the document by passing the document as an argument to the getValue method in this case. And then we can extract the value, which here, since it's indexed as an array, is the mobile phone of Duke. So we can also do operations to update the document. In this example, again, the document's the argument to replace, as is the replacement value for the pointer for the reference of the pointer. So we can modify the document to have a new phone for Duke. Okay, the other JSON patch. What JSON patch is in IETF is it's a document that expresses a sequence of operations that are intended to be applied to another target document. And there's a fixed set of these operations, namely the ones that I've listed here. So the way the JSON Processing API treats this is that you construct a patch using JSON patch builder methods that correspond to these operations. And then, as with the pointer, you pass the document as an argument to the apply method, which will apply the patch. Or you can retrieve the document, you can get back the modified document as a JSON array. So looking at another example, So here we use the JSON factory class to create the patch builder. And in building our patch, we use this Fluent API to add the operations that we want in this patch. We're going to replace the value of the mobile phone again, and we're going to remove the second element from this array. So we build the patch, and then we apply the patch and retrieve the result. So the result is going to look, one thing that the JSON patch standard says is that the operations in the patch are applied sequentially. So you can apply a subsequent patch operation to the result of a previous patch operation. I'm just showing something more simple here, but that's the way a patch works. So first we're going to replace the value of the mobile phone, and then we're going to remove the second element from the array. JSON merge patch operates somewhat differently, and I'm not going to go through the APIs here, but the way this works is you construct a patch that you compare against your target document, and depending on how the comparison shakes out, then you're going to get a modification in the result. So if the member is there in both the original and the patch, but with a different value, then you apply the value of the patch. If there is no such element in the original, then you add it. And if there is a null value in the patch, then you remove it. So the other enhancement that's important in this JSON processing release is integration with the Lambdas. And if we look at the example here, we've got what I think of as a JSON query that's filtering over a set of females' contact info entries, and it's filtering out the females and extracting the names of the female members and collecting it to a list. So what we've lost here is the fact that we're exiting the JSON world and we've just got back a list of Java strings, a Java list of strings. But by enhancing JSON with collectors that are JSON specific, such as here a collectors for converting to JSON arrays, we've now gotten back the result in a form that we can just simply pipe it to further JSON specific operations. And they're also collectors to JSON object and group by collectors. Okay, so I want to switch over now to the JSON Binding API. This is new to this release. And the way you can think of it is in analog to Jaxrs. That is, it provides a mapping between JSON text and Java objects. So you can serialize and deserialize between the two. It provides a set of useful defaults, but also two forms of customization through annotations, which are good for small-scale customizations, and then it gives you a runtime configuration builder that lets you apply configurations that lets you apply customizations in addition to those that you, and also user-defined customizations in the form of adapters. It's got provisions for plugging in the JSON binding provider of your choice, so you don't need to use the built-in one. So two key interfaces here, JSONB Builder, which is the entry point into this API, and that gives you operations for setting the configuration properties and for choosing your provider. And then JSONB, which you construct using the JSONB Builder, which provides the serialization and deserialization operations. So to look at a small example, here we're creating an inventory, a list of cars. We got two cars. We got a Prius and we've got a Tesla. We're adding them to this array list. And then we're using our JSON builder to create an instance of the JSONB class. And then we can just simply serialize these objects to a JSON array, and you get a result that looks something like this. So for customization, you can customize via annotations. In this case, we're defining a different mapping for the first name property. We're going to assume that the target document, when we deserialize, we're assuming the target document has an element called name, and we're going to deserialize into first name of this class. By default, the mapping is using properties and not mapping private instance variables. You can control that. In the second example, we're showing how you would map the first name instance variable, which would ordinarily not have been mapped. So there's a fairly wide range of customizations that you can apply. The naming of properties, the ordering, if you want the ordering in the JSON document to be different, which ones to ignore, how to handle nulls, what should be visible, what your date and number formats are. And you can define custom adapters. So an adapter is a class that you would implement. It should implement the, I think it's called JSONB adapter interface, which has the methods for serialization and deserialization of mappings. So in this example, we're creating a JSONB config. We're saying that we want the result to be formatted, and we want to use the car adapter that we've defined. And then once you give this config to create when you're creating your JSONB instance, and this adapter is going to be used in the mapping of those classes. There's something else you can do here with this API. Namely, in creating the JSONB builder, you can specify the provider that you want used. So we don't want to use the default provider of our implementation. We can simply specify the provider that you want. And since JSON, there are a number of open source JSON binding implementations, so this is quite relevant, I think. Okay, I want to switch over now to Jaxrs. There are three key areas that Jaxrs 2.0 is planning to address in this release. A Reactive Client API, support for ServerSent Events, which are also part of the HTML5 standard, and then support for non-blocking I/O. So in terms of Client API, Jaxrs introduced a Client API in the 2.0 release with Java EE7. And this simple example shows you one of the forms that this can take. In this case, we're creating a web target resource, and then we're applying the request from that resource and getting the result back as a string. So notice that this is all synchronous. Jaxrs 2.0 also introduced an asynchronous form of this API. So if you use the async method, instead of just getting back your result, you're going to get back a future. And then you can check when the result is available and so on using the standard futures APIs. Or if you want to be fancier than that, then you can specify a callback handler which will notify you when the result is completed. Now, that doesn't leverage what we have in Java SE 8. So what Java with Jaxrs 2.1 has done has been to introduce a real reactive client API. So notice the RX method in this invocation. So instead of getting back just a future, what we get back is a completion stage. So you can now use all of the power of the completion stage APIs in Java SE to specify how you want to sequence or combine or to concatenate, if you will, these results, and how you want to handle exceptions and what kind of priorities you want to give to what results. In this simple example, we're just accepting the result and printing it out. This is what accept takes is a functional interface, so we are just passing in the print line method, and we're just going to print out our result. In this example, we have two invocations, so two completion stages, and we're going to combine them. So our result will be something like hello, bonjour, which is a little bit silly when we do the combination, and then we're just going to print it out again. Okay, so moving along a little more quickly, I think. ServerSent Events are another one of the key enhancements in Jaxrs 2.1. If you're familiar with the RI Jersey, the way these APIs are shaken out is somewhat different from what's in Jersey. So ServerSent Events are targeted allowing the client to subscribe to event notifications from the server. And the way that this works is the client establishes the connection to the server, which is held for a long time. It's reused by multiple event notifications from the server. The client opens the connection, and then the server can send back as many messages as are appropriate through the connection. There's a special media type for this, which was defined by HTML5, namely text event stream. And an event itself is a structured object. It has an ID, a name, data field. Most important is the data field, which contains the payload for the event. So two key APIs on the client side. SSE event source, which is used in opening the connection to the web target and subscribing the consumer. I put consumer here in capitals because it's a functional interface as defined in SE8. And then you can close the connection. And an inbound SSE event, which models the event and its payload. So on the client, you would have something like this in a really simple case. Again, you create the web target, and then from that, we're going to create the event source. We're going to create the event source and subscribe it. And the argument to subscribe is the consumer that's going to be invoked when the event is received. And then when we open the event source, then the process starts off and you start receiving events. On the server side, instead of an event source, we have an event sync. This is injected as a parameter to the resource method that's going to be invoked. And it corresponds to the HTTP connection back to the client. SSE is I guess you can think of it as a factory class. It's used to create outbound events and broadcasters. Broadcasters allow you to broadcast to multiple clients. So here, this code snippet represents a resource method on the server side. Notice in the produces annotation, we're using the media type ServerSent Events. This equates to this enum, and this is a Jaxrs enum. This equates to the string text event stream. So when this method is invoked, then the event sync is being used to broadcast to the specific client. Okay, I want to talk next about servlet, but before we talk about servlet, I think the key thing is to say some words about HTTP2. This is now a standard from IATF. Its goals are to address the limitations of the existing HTTP protocols. 1.1, I think, dates back to 1999, so it's fairly old in our terms. To reduce latency, to support parallelism without the workaround of using multiple connections to achieve parallelism, address the head-of-line blocking problem, and other performance limitations of the existing protocol. So the way this works is by multiplexing over a single connection with multiple streams. And the streams themselves are broken into frames, where frames are self-describing. So a frame has information about its order in the stream as well as the stream to which it belongs. So this protocol allows you to do prioritization of streams, so you can push more urgent data out first. It gives you a server push capability whereby on the server side you can anticipate data that's going to be needed by the client in advance of the client's request, so the client can cache this. And this allows you to optimize time that wouldn't otherwise be used. And there are header compression facilities and other enhancements. So looking at servlet, this is the big ticket item in servlet 4.0. Most of this work is under the covers. That is, it's not visible at the user API level except for server push. And server push was added in the early draft release of the servlet 4.0 spec, so you can download that and examine what's been done with this API. And one of our spec leads for servlet, Ed Burns, is here in the audience if you'd like to talk to him later on about enhancements to servlet. JSF is a mature technology, and what this release, this is a dot release, it's relatively small scale. It's addressing quite a few community requested features, actually an enormous number of community requested features. When I first prepared this slide deck, I think there were over 600 issues that had been addressed in this release. So many of these are targeted at better integration with other APIs and with Java SE 8, leverage of Java SE 8 features. Ed is also specification lead for JSF, so if you have questions about JSF, Ed's your friend. So the question arises, given that we paired the action-based MVC API from Java EE 8, why are we continuing with JSF? JSF was so far along, it was so near completed, that it certainly made sense to make this part of Java EE 8. And I think JSF is now at its proposed final draft stage and will wrap up very soon. CDI is one of the key technologies in the platform for ease of development. The goal of CDI 2.0 is focused mainly around support for defining how CDI behaves outside of a Java EE container. That is, how you can use CDI in Java SE environments. So one of the key features here was an API to allow you to bootstrap a CDI container in Java SE. The spec was split into 3 logical parts, not 3 documents, but the spec distinguishes among core CDI, that is, those features that are common in both SE and EE environments, and then those that are specific to each. For SE, this consists largely of the bootstrapping API, and for EE, there are it defines the rules for integration with EE-specific technologies. For example, how EJBs are CDI, EJB session beans function as CDI beans, and how resource injection works. In addition, there are some other useful enhancements. I'm going to talk now about observers and events. So this is what things look like in CDI 1.1. You obtain an event, And then you can fire a notification to the observers that have registered for the events. And there are 2 observers here, and they're expecting payment information. So these observers, they're invoked synchronously with the firing of the event, and there's no defined order among observers. So if an observer terminates with an exception, then the subsequent observers aren't going to be invoked and your observer chain stops. CDI 2.0 has added 2 major enhancements to observers, one of which is the ability to order these synchronous observers. And the way you do that is you use the priority annotation with your observer argument. And so in this case, we've ordered these 2 observers. They're still invoked synchronously. I was talking about MRs, so the ability to add priority for a parameter was added in a minor MR to the common annotation spec, so that underwent an MR in this release. And CDI adds the ability to have async events. And the way this works is both parts need to line up. You need to fire your event as async, so fire async, and then your observers are observes async. What the CDI spec says is that these observers, the firing and the observing are going to be on different threads. It doesn't say, however, how many threads there will be for observers. There could potentially be 1, or there could be a thread per observer, but the spec doesn't require that. So because these are async, you can't use the priority annotation here because there's no guaranteed ordering. If you do, I think it's just non-portable. BEValidation is also undergoing a 2.0 release. BEValidation is one of those APIs that, again, is usable across the various component types. For some cases, it's more tightly integrated. You can think JPA, for example, than with others, but you can always invoke BEValidation programmatically in any component. So BEValidation has been enhanced with support for a number of Java SE8 features. Time APIs, you can have annotations that are applied to Java time types, repeatables, and then constraints applied to collection items and optionals. And there's some new constraints. I think non-empty has been added, but email is still, I believe, under discussion. The specification lead for the previous releases of BEValidation, Emmanuel Bernard, is here at the conference, and I know he's going to be giving a talk on BEValidation. I think it's later today. I'm not quite sure about that, but I know he's going to be here today. So I would go to that if you're interested in learning in depth. So to give a couple of small examples, you can use the past and future annotations with Java time types now. You can use repeating annotations. So here we've assigned different groups for different types of users. And depending on the relevant group, then the requirements for the passwords differ. In these examples, we're showing how you can apply constraints with container elements. When you insert into this map, then the constraints on the validity of customer and account are both going to be checked. You can apply constraints with optional containers, and then you can apply even new constraints. So the final API that I want to talk about is Java security. This is a 1.0 release, so this is new. And its goal is to modernize and simplify Java EE security APIs. The early draft was just released last week, so the expert group has been asking for much feedback, so I would encourage you to download that and send feedback to the expert group. It introduces 3 new APIs so far, Security Context and HTTP Authentication Mechanism API, and an Identity Store API. So some of these are trying to simplify by using common approaches and mechanisms, or to take the more complex APIs and remove them from the developer view where possible. And it provides, it allows you to leverage CDI injection to do this. So security context, this is right now under some heavy discussion in the security expert group as to whether or not security context is actually needed. And again, they're looking for feedback. The spec lead is speaking this afternoon, Will Hopkins. He's giving a talk on this, on the security API. So again, I'd encourage you to go. So one of the things that the security context is trying to do is to provide more uniform APIs across the spec with get caller principal and is caller and role. This is intended to supersede the plethora of naming conventions that have been used by the component technologies. And I've just illustrated servlet and EJB here, but there are more. So the issue was, well, do we really need to do this? There are a few subtle differences among these APIs and the containers, so I'm kind of on the fence with this one myself. And authenticate, which is used to invoke authentication in servlet. It takes a request response and some context information, I think, on that. So this one's still under debate. Perhaps more important is the HTTP Authentication Mechanism API, which is intended specifically for the servlet container. And it's modeled on JSPIC. And the JSPIC API is intended to delegate to this. You write to the HTTP Authentication Mechanism API, which is simpler to write to, and you can define methods that are invoked for validate request that's invoked before do filter or do service. So you can specify custom authentication in this method. Secure response, that's invoked after the termination of the filter and service methods. You could use this, for example, for encryption if you want it. And clean subject, which is used in response to logout, might allow you to clean up a user-specific state like cookies. The HTTP authentication mechanism itself can delegate to the new Identity Store API that's been added. And Identity Store has 2 purposes. It has methods for authentication, and it has methods for authorization. And it's optional as to whether, which of these you implement. You can implement both. But the goal here is to interact with user stores for authentication information and group information. There are built APIs for LDAP, database, and embedded identity stores right now. Embedded is designed mostly just for prototyping because you wouldn't want to store this user password information in your app or with your app. The validate method provides a credential validation result, which itself can wrap different types of credentials. And you can also obtain the group information. Okay, I'm pretty much out of time here. So just to give you a quick overview of where we are today, CDI has just completed its public review ballot. It unanimously passed, so congratulations to the CDI expert group. Some of these APIs are further along than others. JSONB, JSONP, and servlet not servlet, Jaxrs are all at or past the proposed final draft stage. Servlet's anticipating, JSF is anticipating the final release shortly. And then others are somewhat less far along. Both Jaxrs and security have recently released early draft reviews. Did I turkey that? Yes, I did. Sorry. So just to sum up, this is obviously work in progress. We're working very aggressively with a target release date of this summer is our target. We're being very aggressive. It's all being done as open source implementations, you know, Glassfish, and then some of the component plugin implementations, Jersey, JSON for JSONB. And if I didn't say it enough times, we really want contributions, we want feedback on this work. The first URL here is into the Java EE spec project on java.net. This has a table of all of the JSRs that are part of the Java EE platform, and it's got links to their user group and their web pages, their JIRAs, so hopefully everything you need to send feedback to the specification leads and the projects. Adopt a JSR is a wonderful program where users can get together. These have been historically mostly jugs, but you don't need to be a jug to do an Adopt a JSR. To aggregate feedback and channel it to an expert, expert groups. So many of our expert groups are participants in the Adopt a JSR projects. Heather Vancouver is one of our prime advocates for Adopt a JSR. If she's here, Heather, I can't see you, but please wave your hand. Heather will be in the exhibit area, and feel free to contact her about Adopt a JSR. And if you have technical comments regarding the platform as a whole, you can certainly send them to me, but more useful would be to send them to the users list for the platform JSR, and that's available at this link, and that will go to the members of the expert group for the platform. I'd love to take Q&A, but we're running late, and I want to give the next speaker a chance. So if you have any questions, I'll be here. I'll be on the exhibit floor with, I think, Night Hacking, and I'll be on the exhibit floor, and I'll be available there for any kind of questions. So, thank you.